Will you please listen up to what I have to say? Cause we're in for some old-fashioned wrestling today. Not the violent, oily opposerish kind, but the kind that involves pins and thumbs you will find. Cause it's thumb wrestling time. Yes, it's thumb wrestling time. So we will discuss pros and cons, faults and pluses of all your favorite movies. And we will ponder the merits of cinema in this WrestleMania. Cause it's thumb wrestling time. Yes, it's thumb wrestling time. Yes, it's thumb wrestling time.
Hello, pod people. Wow! That's from Ovation of the Body Snatchers. You are listening to a brand new episode of Thumb Wrestling, the podcast in which two opinions about one movie collide with possibly disastrous effects, or at least movie conversation. And this is episode 127 hours. Episode 127. And it's one we've recorded a while back on April 23rd of this year. But then an AI experiment presented itself and you had to wait a little longer for an English episode with a living guest. But here it is. I had to speak with my podcast through Zoom because he resides in the UK. He, in fact, is getting his PhD in film and television at the University of Bristol. It is Charlie Harris. You might know him from the Because You Watched podcast, which he hosts together with Francesco Quario. And the name Because You Watched is as in the notice you get after watching a movie on a streaming platform where you get recommendations of other movies. Only in this podcast, Charlie and Francesco and whoever is their guest each pick another movie to discuss. So, for instance, when our mutual friend and film critic Kai van Zule was their guest in an episode about Blade Runner, he chose a very weird Tamil robot movie called Antiran, which is 2 hours and 35 minutes and which both Charlie and Francesco had to watch. Charlie's reaction was pretty priceless, so I recommend you give it a listen, even if you're not going to watch Antiran. But this time, Charlie got to choose, and he chose a doozy. He went for the big one. The one at the top of the IMDb top 250 of best movies voted by the public at large. Yes, we did it! Charlie Harris gives his thumb down to The Shawshank Redemption, directed by Frank Darabont. The story based on the novella by Stephen King about Andy Dufresne, herein played by Tim Robbins, who gets a double life sentence for a double murder of his wife and a lover. And he lands in Shawshank Prison near Portland, Maine. And he quickly befriends Red, who is played by Morgan Freeman. But Andy isn't like the other prisoners. He crafts a chess game with rocks he found in the compound. He has to fight off frequent rapes. He aids the prison staff with their financials. He cooks the books, so to say, because he was a banker on the outside. And he helps build a much bigger prison library. But he also clings to hope, which is a luxury in a prison. But when Old Man Brooks is released from prison and can't adjust to his life outside and then commits suicide, and then the warden goes off him and crushes his last chance of getting out before his sentence is over, all hope seems to be lost, and Andy gets a length of rope and goes to his cell, never to emerge again. Not because he hung himself, but because he escaped. He dug himself out with a tiny rock hammer, which took him 20 years. When an old and very disillusioned Red finally gets released after a parole hearing, after 40 years in prison, he remembers that Andy invited him to come look him up in Zihuatanejo, Mexico, and he takes a bus there to finally reunite with his friend. The end. So, I can't wait to get to this conversation with Charlie Harris about Shawshank Redemption, and I figure neither can you. Let's go.
3, 2, 1, fight!
So, can I start by saying that it is very weird to see your face when I'm listening to you?
Oh, yeah, how
Because
come?
I've gotten so used to your voice without a face, just a drawing of you.
But we post selfies on our social media and everything.
Maybe I don't follow your social media well enough. I'm not sure.
Maybe we don't post enough.
And still different from seeing a talking face compared to just a selfie.
Well, it's lovely to meet you after trying to arrange this for the last few weeks to talk about a film that is... I don't know if polarizing's the right word, because that would kind of imply that people had strong feelings either way about the Shawshank Redemption.
I don't think it is polarizing, is it?
No, it's not polarizing as such. I think the fact that it doesn't have the ability to polarize is annoying to some people. Because it is such an inoffensive film.
Mm-hmm. And
what do you think of it?
Well, if I wouldn't have liked it, then I wouldn't have invited you on to demolish it.
I don't think I'm going to demolish it.
All right.
I don't think I'm going to demolish it as such. I think I just want to have a discussion about why you like it and why I think it occupies such a strange place in our pop culture. Because it's a film that so many people have seen.
Yeah, it's been on the top of the IMDb top 250 for so long that it's one of those where you almost forget it's there. In a way.
What's so strange about that is that IMDb don't just do it via ratings, they do it by the number of ratings.
Mm-hmm.
So IMDb is unique in that it's classed as a very well-beloved film because it's just a film that loads of people have seen. And part of that is because the TV rights were given away for so little because the film didn't make a huge amount of money. And people didn't think it was going to be this sort of sleeper hit that everyone saw, but once it got to TV, it was on TV all the time. Everyone ended up seeing it and thinking, yeah, this film's quite a good film, and I think it has some stuff going for it. It's got Morgan Freeman, it's got Stephen King. Not many people know who Frank Darabont is, but it has the visage and presents itself as a good film.
Mm-hmm.
It has the trappings of a good film. And I'm not even saying it's a bad film, but enough people have seen it to think that this is what a good film should be and should look like. So I think like I said, I think it occupies such a unique space, and it's very interesting to talk about and examine that.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, every time I see it, it kind of leaves me wanting more. It's a bit too parabolic for me. It's a bit too fabulistic. And the performances are really interesting and really good, particularly the two leads. You kind of wish you got to know them more as people than as allegories. For example, I think that a lot of the edges are sanded off. The characters, and it is believable in the world that King and Darabont and the actors create, that they don't talk about their crimes, but when you consider what they're all in there accused of and how long they've all spent in prison, I'm not saying they have to act like stereotypical hardened criminals. I just think that it's all a bit too cute.
Was this your opening statement?
I think I'm happy with that as my opening statement, Your Honor.
What was the first time when you saw the film?
When I saw this movie for the first time.
Oh, first time I saw the film, I think I was about 16. I rented it from the video store, and I watched it with my dad, actually, and I liked the film a lot. I definitely thought it was better than I do now, but I don't think I think the things that I liked about it when I was much younger don't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. I've not gone off the things I like about the film, but they're not enough to make me like the film anymore. How about you?
I can still look at it more critically and still admire it for what it is.
Yeah, the problem is I see what it is and don't really admire it.
It's 106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
I do think that it is a very well-made film in quite a lot of ways. The construction of it, the construction of the story is very good if you consider the whole point of, especially the escape itself and everything surrounding it, the build-up to it, the way it's introduced to you, and where it's being put to you as a surprise on your first viewing. I think all that is very well constructed, so that's something that I really admired this time around.
Yeah.
It comes at a point where we've had the example of Brooks, who's been institutionalized. We've had Andy talk about hope and all that kind of thing, especially after Brooks has gone away, and the stuff with Tommy, where you think, well, maybe this time they got him. And I really enjoy the build-up of the moment, the looks, the meaningful looks that you take one way, but when you revisit it, you can see, oh, it means something completely different because now you know where it is headed. And all that kind of stuff that's built into the movie, which is really a construction of expectations. And the second time you see this knowledge, basically, about what's going to happen, that is what really makes me admire the film every time I see it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and I don't think they're wrong points. It just doesn't lead me to the same appreciation or enjoyment of the film that it seems to for you. And that's fine.
Yeah.
Because that's art, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, it's your own interpretation. I'm not qualified to speak about whether this is a good or bad movie. I can only talk about what it does and doesn't do for me.
Yeah. Well, I think most of the construction of the film is also very much Spielbergian, throwbacky to earlier types of Hollywood films, like films. It feels like a 50s movie or something like that. Something that's very upbeat, very schmaltzy.
Yeah, you kind of expect Henry Fonda to turn up.
Yeah. And it's that is played well. And I think that's also a part of why it feels sort of completely inoffensive and easy to like. It feels like one of those good old movies, one of those that they don't make anymore.
It's interesting you mentioned Spielberg. Do you know what his review of the film was to Frank Darabont?
I don't know, no.
He said, "It's a chewing gum movie. If you step on it, it sticks to your shoe." And I don't know if that's positive or negative, but I think it's a very Spielbergian comment.
I do think it's sort of a words of appreciation. It sticks to your shoe, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's accurate. I just don't know whether or not I like stepping in chewing gum, and you seem to.
I usually save it for home, and then I bite it off and then suck on it for a couple of hours, yeah.
A lot of the problems I have with this is the same problems I have with Forrest Gump.
Also very inoffensive, very throwbacky.
But at least Forrest Gump has this sort of... I think this is a better movie than Forrest Gump, to be clear. But I think Forrest Gump does have this sort of ironic, satirical bent that I quite appreciate in its own way. Whereas this is so achingly sincere, but it doesn't seem... And I don't mind sincerity at all. What I mind is sincerity about seemingly nothing. Like... Well, what's the point? Is it just the triumph of the human spirit? Well, fine. Sure. But in that case, it would only be effective if this was a true story. If it's meant to be a fable should have a clear moral.
Does a fable need a moral?
Yeah, that's the whole... To my mind, that's the whole point of a fable.
Yeah, if you're talking about classic
fables. As opposed
fables.
to say a fairy tale. I think fables are about a moral and about a message.
This is a Hollywood fable, though.
Yeah, I get it. But if the message is just...
Hope.
The human will, when put to it, can confront and achieve anything. Well, this is a made-up story, so that's bullshit.
I'm not sure if they're saying that everyone would be in the same position as Andy if they put their minds to it. He is being made out to be sort of a special sort of character within the confines of that prison.
Yeah, and part of it is that he is this educated, white, middle-class prisoner. And I think that is relevant to the plot. That's not something that it sort of coasts on. I think that is important to his character, so that's not a ding on the film. But he's not necessarily special because of his inherent qualities, the things that allow him to thrive in the prison is that he is this sort of rarefied, more genteel sort of prisoner.
Do you think that's because of his background, that he is not some sort of a character flaw that misfires in normal life, but somehow finds his way in a prison? Because that's more the way I interpret it.
Oh no, I think that interpretation is correct. What I'm saying is that the reason he's able to set up basically an accountancy practice for the prison is because in his life before prison, he had opportunities that others didn't have, and he has this sort of paternalistic uplifting of the other prisoners that, again, is interesting and is very in character. It's just simultaneously, if it is a story about, again, I keep saying the triumph of the human spirit.
Yeah.
The fact that Andy is only really able to do that because he becomes useful because of his background makes that ring kind of hollow.
And because he's dumb enough to step up to Hadley and go, "Do you trust your wife?"
I don't think that is a dumb move. I think it's presented as a brave move and maybe a reckless move.
Very reckless.
But it pays off.
Yeah,
and that's the other
it's
thing.
also because he's not willing to conform to prison, to the mores there are there. And there are multiple ways of interpreting that, I think. Dumb
But
is
how
just
is that
something was just a label for me to put on it to probably make light of it.
But how is that different to Brooks deciding to be a librarian? Or Red deciding to be a contraband guy? Like, everyone figures out identities for themselves to pass the time. And, jobs for themselves to be able to cling to some sort of individuality. And it just happens that Andy's way of doing it grants him a more rarefied existence because of his education.
I do wonder if Brooks really chose to be a librarian, or he was just thrust into it.
Okay, so he goes to prison in 2005, in 1905, and then joins the library in 1912. So he'd been there for a while, and he'd stuck it out for long enough, but it takes someone like Andy with his eloquence and determination and persistence to be able to sort of modernize it and upgrade it.
Yeah.
I think we're meant to believe that the identity that Brooks had as an educated person, as a sort of proto-Andy, to be honest, as someone who could occupy this sort of fatherly figure for his friends. If it wasn't his choice to go into the prison, I believe it was his choice to make the librarian his identity and to stick it out as long as he did.
But I think you get into also sort of a Clerks type of conversation there. Does he choose to be a librarian and make that his identity? Or is he being thrust into the function of librarian because it's just available to him? And then that sort of determines what he becomes.
Fine, but there's a difference between being a guy that works in the library and being a librarian.
Yeah.
There's a difference between being an old man and being a father to his friends.
Yeah.
It's not the situation, it's what Brooks makes of the situation.
I think it's still being part of sort of a system that would be there with or without him. And whoever would be in that situation could become those things, or maybe two people could become those two things separately.
You mentioned systems, and I think that's another, maybe a ding I have on the film, is that the ostensible crimes of Shawshank Prison seem to exist largely in a vacuum. There's one bribe we see, but once it's exposed, there is no institutional cover for this thing. And we know that these things are happening in prisons, not just in America, but largely in privatized prisons in America. And it was just a matter of exposing it, and everything comes tumbling down. And I don't know, that feels quite naive to me. I don't think this is a political film, and I don't think this film has a particularly political bent. So rather than having bad politics and that being a problem, I think the fact that it sort of has no politics, but is occupying a space where it's supposedly discussing the place of the prison system in American life, I think its lack of politics is a problem, frankly. But I think the politics is part of a larger problem of just... It's strange, because I haven't read the novella, but I understand that, especially for a Stephen King book, it's quite short. But he's also dealing with the same problem. I think to me, the largest problem is that it covers 20 years in this prison, and so much happens in that time that never really gets explored. We only really find out that Andy has gone all out on writing letters to the state government.
Yeah.
When he's succeeded at getting all the books. It's not long after we see that Tommy is trying to get his school diploma, and then we found out that he actually got it. Every problem in the film is relieved very quickly. I was actually very struck this time because when the sisters, who I think I sort of coded as a sort of Aryan Brotherhood-like gang, are assaulting Andy, in my head, I had remembered that as going on until like halfway through the film, but that again, that's handled right after the Hadley conversation and the beers on the roof.
Yeah. Once Andy becomes useful,
that situation is handled. No problems other than just the fact that they're in prison, which I don't think is really represented as a problem in and of itself. It's more what the prison is doing and how they're allowed to live in the prison.
That's probably very symptomatic of how the story of Stephen King came to be, which is he just remembered watching loads of prison movies when he was younger, and he made sort of an amalgamation of all of them within one story.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's also, if you look at it from a Stephen King perspective, and again, from what I've not read it, but I understand that there is a lot more detail given to the murders that Red and Brooks committed. Both of them killed their wives.
Yeah.
And others. So there's that. And I think that from what I understand, there's also the time spent in prison is also in some ways allegorical for Stephen King's struggles with sobriety.
Probably, yeah. But what in Stephen King isn't an allegory for his struggles with sobriety?
Which, that's using prison as a metaphor for that. That's not a bad idea, but I think that it's a lot less powerful when you sand the edges off of your characters, that it just sort of becomes a pretty vanilla, Christ-like story.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Yeah, with Red, it's actually changed. In the book, he has murdered his wife because he wants to get insurance by cutting the brakes of her automobile. But then she has two other passengers, a neighbor and child, and they die too. So that gets him into way more trouble. In the movie, they just changed it to he did an armed robbery and someone was killed.
Which, to be fair, works better for that version of the character.
Exactly.
Red, as played by Morgan Freeman, is shown to be a very, humble and introspective character. And the fact that he did an armed robbery when he was younger, which, is obviously a crime, but it's a crime that is a lot less malicious than murder with forethought.
Exactly. You sort of can forgive him for past mistakes, and also he's remorseful about himself. He is, the first time you hear him speak about it, he already feels like he's sorry about it. In the parole hearing at the end of the movie, it's even more so. So it's very easy to think, he was a dumb kid, he made a mistake, it got out of hand, and it got him into this predicament for 40 years in a prison.
Yeah, I think that's it. But also the existence of Red as a black man as opposed to an Irishman as he is in the book, and the fact that, yes, he performs an armed robbery, but Andy Dufresne has to be convicted of murdering his wife and her lover in a very calculated way to get his, I think, 2 life sentences.
Yeah.
And there is something interesting about the fact that Red seems to have committed still a terrible crime that resulted in someone's death, but a less malicious and less horrifying crime in the grand scheme of things that has got him seemingly a longer sentence.
And it's one where you can more feel the socio-economic causes of the, causes.
Okay, fine, I agree.
Yeah.
But then it's never discussed.
Yeah.
And we don't need a scene where he breaks down and says, oh, it's hard to be a black man in a prison in Maine. That's not what I'm saying. But if you want to have that subtext, you need to do something with it. It's not enough to just say, oh, racism's bad, or not say it, just sort of hint at it.
Well, I do think that is very much a reflection of this being a movie from 1994, which is before 9/11 and even more before.
And it's post-Cold War.
Those 10 years when we thought that we'd fixed the world in the West, basically, and racism wasn't really a thing anymore. And even, look, a white man and a black man in prison can be friends. That's sort of the implication of it.
There are very few black characters in the film, though. Mm-hmm. I understand one of the leads is Morgan Freeman, but for a prison and the conviction rates for African Americans being what they are, and I understand it's Maine, which is a notoriously white state in America, but the fact that their friendship is shown to cross racial barriers, that's nice, and that also kind of goes to show that Andy has a different perspective on these things, but all of Red's friends are already white.
Yeah.
So if their relationship crossing racial lines was meant to mean anything, it kind of doesn't, because it's seemingly never been a problem before Andy got there.
No, it seems more like a colorblind casting before it even was a thing.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I don't have any problems with colorblind casting as long as you recognize that casting someone with a different perspective, and meaning that the character will have had different experiences, especially if it's a historical piece, you need to do something. You know, you need to do something with it. And you need to actually make changes rather than have it go as it is.
At one point, you have the bit with the bribe with Warden Norton, all that sort of thing. During a speech where it is alluded to by Red that the way he sources out all the prisoners in a big plan is sort of slavery. It's even, the word slave is even used.
It's used by the guy doing the bribe.
Yeah. So is that even more sour in a movie where...
With a predominantly white cast.
In a prison, yeah. Even though historically, as what was it called, 13th, the Ava DuVernay documentary, 13th.
So you're not talking about Wrinkle in Time?
No.
When you talk about Ava DuVernay?
No.
It's good to be clear.
I'm not that well versed in my Ava DuVernay Disney project, sorry.
They really fucks her on that. We talk about this on our Black Panther episode, but they're releasing that alongside Black Panther was a stupid thing to do. Anyway, back to Shawshank. Let's get back in our cell. But again, my problem, I hope you don't mind talking about spoilers.
Everyone has seen this movie. There are no spoilers.
Oh, that's the whole point. That's the only reason it's famous, is that everyone's seen it and no one really hates it.
So your basic point is that this is another version of A Christmas Story.
No, I think A Christmas Story is better. I think Christmas Story is better. Genuinely. I think that is a very sweet film with an actual sense of humor based in a unique perspective. Mm-hmm.
I really didn't like that one the first time I saw it, but that is a different thing. That's one where I feel, you get used to that one through repeat because of TV syndication.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a Jew from England, so I only saw A Christmas Story as an adult. I didn't grow up with it, which I think
Same here.
Means that if you're watching it more critically, you can be like, oh, there are things I like about this. It kind of reminds me of other Christmas films that I kind of like.
Yeah.
Like the only Christmas film I watched growing up were the Home Alone movies, which, not a bad way to go.
No.
There are no good Hanukkah movies.
8 Crazy Nights?
Dude.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
My problem with it covering so much and doing sort of nothing with it, I think it's best exemplified by The Escape. Because we're kept in the dark for so long over what Andy is actually up to, because it's all from Red's perspective. The actual escape, we only find out once it's succeeded. So there's no tension, there's no suspense. And I know that's not what it's going for. This isn't a failing of the film for not getting suspense or tension.
But there is suspense there about whether he's going to commit suicide or not.
Oh, for 30 seconds. Who gives a shit? And like, I don't think that is... For 30
seconds, I would agree with that, yeah. But...
I'm sorry, that's not enough. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because no character is involved in it. All they can do is react to, has this man killed himself, or has he not?
Yeah.
But the escape itself is covered in about 30 seconds as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I want to see Andy crawling through shit for that long.
Oh, that sounds
but the fact
like
that
it.
We get, well, maybe. Like, it's a horrific thing to do, and it's skirted through as narration. It's just meh. I don't care. Like, you're telling me all this stuff after the point where I can get invested in it because I know it's succeeded. So all I can really think is good for you.
But it's not meant for you to get invested in. It's meant for you to be surprised by, and it succeeds at that the first time you see it.
Yes.
That is the whole point of the construction.
Sure, it's effective as a surprise, but is a surprise on its own narratively fulfilling? And I don't think it is. Mm-hmm. It seems to be for you, which is fine.
Yeah, in this case it is. Not always, but...
The thing is, like, I love prison breaks in movies. I like to see how they're constructed, and I do like the construction of it, but part of the construction is the way they deal with problems and the way that the characters come up with solutions for that, because we're seeing the fully formulated plan. Mm-hmm. We're seeing it after the fact.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm robbed of the prison break part of the movie.
Okay, I do understand that in a way where I agree that I prefer to watch that kind of a movie.
Yeah.
Like A Man Escaped is exhilarating with all kinds of little bits of problem solving along the way to get someone out of a prison. I love that. The problem solving that goes into that. It's a
bit like a heist movie.
Yeah.
Like Ocean's 11, obviously the Soderbergh one, it has its big twist, and it shows you happening after the fact.
Yeah.
But the only reason why that is narratively fulfilling is because you have still spent all this time with these characters planning a heist and improvising and problem solving.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the whole movie should be about the prison break, but I do think maybe the last third could be. At least we should be able to see from Andy's perspective him planning a prison break, because as great as Morgan Freeman is, and as interesting as Red is as a character, he doesn't really do a lot. And because we're observing Andy, who is the protagonist in that he instigates most of the plot, from Red's perspective, I feel like we can only ever get skin deep into our main character.
I sort of understand what you're saying, but my reading of the way it's constructed with the escape being as it is that for the whole movie, it is a mystery to Red and the other prisoners why Andy is the way he is, why he can hold up that way within that system and isn't broken to it, doesn't conform to it as much as that. But that's probably because he's been working for 20 years at an escape ever since he tried to carve his name into a wall, found out, hey, maybe I can get out.
Okay, fine. But, and I get what you're saying, but I want to just circle back to the fact that you use the word mystery.
Yeah.
Do you know what most mysteries need?
No.
An investigation. You say that all the inmates are trying to figure out Andy and who he is and what he's thinking or what he's up to. But, for example, the rock hammer. Red sees the rock hammer and thinks to himself, you couldn't escape with that, or you couldn't attack someone with that. Put to bed until the end of the movie. None of the prisoners are trying to figure it out. So the reveal is of something that was dropped at the beginning of the movie. If the whole movie was Red trying to actually surreptitiously figure out what Andy was doing, and then it turning out that he had escaped, that would be interesting in my eyes. But the fact that it sort of comes out of nowhere without it being investigated really any point in the film. It's just, not that it makes Red look stupid, but it makes Red look unobservant.
Well, I think most of the things that you would be able to observe, you would have to be a very, very good observer to notice all these things, like him shuffling.
Or you would have to see someone, a very close environment, every day for 20 years, which is what Red does.
But yeah, I'm not sure if that is enough.
I think the amount of time they spend together and the fact that Andy is dropping rocks out of his boxers every day in the exercise yard.
In a place that is just rocks underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, but rocks aren't coming out of other people's trousers. I'm not saying that Red is stupid for not noticing this. I'm saying that Red is frustrating for not wondering what this guy's up to and actually doing anything to find it out. Instead, we get speeches about the philosophy of hope,
which he is in a position to give because he actually is working on something. So maybe it's not supposed to be that the characters are investigating
I don't
him.
think it is a Prison Break movie.
Oh, I wouldn't say it is a Prison Break movie. I wouldn't even say it's a regular prison movie, because normally prison movies are sort of like a miniature universe of the outside world, only on the bigger stresses and stuff like that. But you don't get.
I think it is. I think the reason it's not a prison movie is that most prison movies are crime movies. And it's not really a crime movie.
No.
Even though all the characters are criminals and it ends with a prison break. I think it does try to do the miniature of society in a confined space. But it's a pretty uninteresting version of society. Have you ever listened to Unspooled?
No.
It's a Paul Scheer, Amy Nicholson podcast, and they sort of describe it as a high school movie in a prison.
That feels more apt than a society movie.
Yeah, but I think...
Well, most high school movies are also sort of a miniature of outside world, yeah.
Yeah, but a very specific version. And I think the other thing is trying to do the miniature of society in a prison, or at least a miniature of society in a confined space, doesn't quite work as effectively if it's a period piece, because all you can really do is a miniature of a society of the 1950s, you know?
Yeah, which it doesn't even do that much, really.
You get Tommy, who is like a stereotypical
Greaser.
rockabilly guy. Yeah. And I do like the inclusion of him as showing like, oh, here's someone who is from a world that you guys never saw.
Yeah, but he's more of a reflection of something that they don't get to see inside than anything else. He's not being James Dean in prison or anything.
No, he's just being kind of a fun guy who's trying to, you know, lighten everyone's day. It's almost like an inversion of the Brooks storyline. Because Brooks goes out into the world and sees how much has changed after he leaves prison.
Yeah.
Tommy comes in to the prison and shows people how much the world has changed, but he's bringing that change inside rather than forcing people into the change.
What is the change he brings then?
Genuinely, just that people have a different vernacular and greasier hair.
Yeah.
That's the only change.
Yeah.
Brooks's observations of change are similarly skin deep. It's just that there are a lot of cars and everything's fast. So I don't think I think it's even the same amount of depth.
Sorry, what is your point with this?
I'm just thinking out loud about the fact that it's a historical thing, which, going back to our thing about a prison movie being a confinement of society at large.
Yeah.
And if it's a period piece, then it's sort of a confinement of that period society at large.
Yeah.
But even when you bring in a character who seems to embody a new era, it doesn't really tell you anything about the era other than the aesthetics.
No, you get quickly rock and roll song is played when the bus comes in with new prisoners, and he has greasy hair. That's it.
Exactly, that's it. And again, It's frustrating.
Oh, maybe, but also inside the prison, time stands still, and it even stands still way more in the movie than it does in the short stories, where at least you have a succession of 3 wardens, but in the film, you just get the same people for 20 years, and they don't even change much.
No, I think that's absolutely right. No one really changes.
No.
Throughout the film. I think that there is some... I think the old age makeup is actually pretty good.
The old age
makeup?
makeup?
That shows the passage of time, but... I don't give a shit.
They don't really use that much, though.
No, which I think makes it more effective.
Yeah. Some of them get a bit more grey hair, and that's most of it.
Yeah, and I think Robbins gets a bit more jowly. But I don't know if that's his performance rather than actual makeup.
I read somewhere that he gets bigger, like rings underneath his eyes, which are supposed to make you think he's being worn down by the warden, but actually it means he's staying up all night to dig. And I thought I never even saw those rings underneath his eyes, so they're well disguised.
See, I noticed those, but I always put it down to, because the scenes where I've noticed them are when he's just come out of solitary.
Yeah, well,
so I put it down to the fact that he'd been worn down in solitary.
Exactly.
Also the fact that Tim Robbins does have a kind of tired face. Even at the beginning of the film. Mm-hmm. You know, he's never baby-faced in this film.
No, but he always does seem a bit goofy and a bit innocent. He does have a straight guy face.
Yeah, I mean, I love goofy Tim Robbins, but we don't really get any of that in the film. Mm-hmm. And again, this isn't even a criticism of the film, but he exists to be a pretty one-note character.
Yeah.
And that's intentional. That's not...
The one note he plays is he's different from everyone else, basically. And a bit more...
Yeah, and he's kind of Jesus.
People have made those readings. Frank Darabont and Stephen King weren't necessarily agreeing to that, but they think it's nice that people see it in there. Yeah,
I think that... You could think of it as quite a lazy reading or a basic reading, but at the end of the day, you know, it does the work, it does the job of adding some depth to this film, which I don't think really has any.
I think it's interesting that a prison movie is actually kind of escapist. Like, it's fun to hang with these guys, even though most of them are probably convicted murderers and stuff like that, but it's not addressed, it's fine.
There was a review I read years ago, but I can't remember who wrote it, is that it said, except for the odd sexual assault, prison looks kind of fun. Like, you just get to hang out with friends.
Yeah.
And work in a library.
If you do people's taxes, yeah.
Or if you're friends with someone that does people's taxes.
Mm-hmm. But then only for 1 month in the year.
Well, yeah, but also the rest of that time they're hanging out in the library.
Loads of the time, yeah. Listening to Hank Williams records and stuff like that.
Which, you know, if I could just listen to Hank Williams all day, maybe I'd commit murder.
Believe me, I tied my own shoes once. It is an overrated experience.
One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting this time round, the thought struck me that, is there something that the film's trying to say about at least people who are in there for long stretches, that is saying sort of like being rehabilitated means almost exactly the same thing as being institutionalized? That by the time they're willing to let you go out into the world, you're not even able to deal with it anymore, so you're harmless. I don't think the point is actually consciously made by the movie, but I do think it's in there.
Like, they talk about becoming institutionalized, and they do discuss the idea of rehabilitated. I don't think they ever consciously or explicitly connect the two.
No, but by the time you have the third parole hearing, you have the succession of the 3 parole hearing during the movies. The first time he's really being subordinate.
He's laying, and he's laying it on thick.
Yeah, the second time he's still saying the same words, but without any conviction. And the third time he's just telling it as it is, what's on his mind, and you just know that he's already made references to being institutionalized himself by that time. So you know where he is as a character, basically. But by that time, he also is very, forthright. He's very clear in the guilt he feels about what he's done as a young man. And he's able to talk about that way better than the first time when he says, yes, I'm changed, I'm completely,
Yeah, but I think also the makeup of the parole board is significantly different by the time of the third parole hearing. Mm-hmm. There are more women, there are people of colour on the committee. It's much more, as much as it does reflect a change in Red's worldview, it also reflects a change in how people are willing to view Red.
I do think that the way he acts is the main point of those 3 parole hearings, not who's on the board.
I agree, but I think subtly it does also show, by this point, the prison system had got more progressive.
Maybe.
Which we know is bullshit.
Yeah.
But that goes more into the political side of it. I agree that it's framed as his speech making the difference, but at the same time, I think it is also significant that the parole board seems to be made up more of people who are willing to believe that he is quote-unquote rehabilitated.
And he even can say stuff like, just stamp the damn thing and let's get on with our lives, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's almost like, you've already made your decision, don't waste my time.
Yeah, and they don't get offended by that anymore because they're way more enlightened.
Progressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, which again, it's a very 90s worldview. Mm-hmm. That things got sorted because Martin Luther King was liberal and non-threatening, which is supposedly the take of every film about the 60s from this era. I do think there is something very moving about this succession of those speeches, and I think Freeman plays it so well. Mm-hmm. I just kind of wish the rest of the movie was on that level.
So if you just had a movie short of just those 3 speeches, that would be enough for you?
Or if those 3 speeches were used as framing devices to symbolize more of a time jump rather than trying to compress 10 years into 45-minute chunks. Mm-hmm. And everything that's happening and none of it being in depth. If you started with the first one and maybe had everything that happens in Andy's first year, and then you have the second one, everything that happens in Andy's 10th year, and then you have the last one, and that's obviously after Andy's left.
Yeah.
So if it was used more like that, I think, I don't know, it's almost like the problem I have with biopics is that when they compress so much into one film and so many years into a very compressed period of time for watching it, you don't really get to explore anything in a satisfying way.
Do you then prefer the way a movie is constructed like Steve Jobs?
I love Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. I think that movie is a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah.
And they're able to take elements of stuff that is happening in other years and put it into one afternoon. And I don't think this film should necessarily do that, but I do think that
it could take lessons from it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that as much as I enjoy some of the Tommy stuff, you could lose it and nothing would change. Andy is already planning to escape. We already know him to be innocent.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird when that Red just throws the conclusion like, well, maybe Andy now thought it was time to go out. Well, he still has to finish his fucking tunnel, so... Yeah,
he's been doing that from day one.
Yeah. It's not like he's had the tunnel there for 5 years, thought, well, let's wait for a good time when I'm surly enough that I want to escape.
Yeah, I guess you kind of need that for him to know that he can prove he's innocent and the warden isn't, but also, we already knew the warden was a bad guy.
Yeah, which is also just a staple of prison movies. Like, if you have criminals and the people who have to keep them in check, they're probably even worse people than anyone else.
Which I don't mind.
Mm-hmm. No.
Especially this sort of character who is, exploiting their labor.
Do you think that Warden Norton is even worse of a heel because he is a Christian? Which gives him sort of a self-legitimization of his actions?
That's an interesting question. Yes and no. I think the fact that he sort of cloaks himself in this self-righteousness is very aggravating, but it's not like Michael Fassbender's character in 12 Years a Slave who uses the Bible to justify certain things. You never get the explicit link between the text of the Bible and the legitimization of exploitation.
It's more of a cloak he wears while doing it than saying it's because of this. But I do think that it does allow him to step into those shoes of a warden more easily.
Yeah, but it's a very specific energy, and I think it's done quite well. As a character, I think Bob Gunson is pretty good as their character. It's just, again, there's just so much that is like almost explored in this film, and then none of it is.
Isn't there also an element of it leaves you to explore and think about these things yourself instead of the movie having to fill everything in? Or is that giving to the movie too much credit?
I think it's giving the movie too much credit because it's a Stephen King story, and Stephen King never saw something he couldn't over-explain. And I don't even dislike Stephen King. I just think that saying that, oh, the ambiguity is his genius masterstroke, that's pretty disingenuous to me.
I don't think I'm trying to say that. I'm just trying to toy with some
I know
ideas.
I know you're not. I know you're not.
I do think that one of the reasons that the movie does work so well, and not necessarily in the cinemas, but especially with home viewing, is very much a symptom of Roger Deakins being very good at filming tiny spaces, very confined space, very dark spaces and stuff like that, and making them look good.
This movie exists in blue, grey and brown.
Yeah.
You don't really need anything particularly advanced on your television to be able to get it in full color. And I like Roger Deakins. I think he is the redeemer of a lot of so-so films. But yeah, I think the fact that this film is very drab looking means that, you know, it doesn't suffer when you watch it on TV. It's like that Shakespeare in Love thing. The fact that Shakespeare in Love is a better home viewing than Saving Private Ryan means that people thought that it was a decent movie, but it's just people weren't watching it in the cinema as much as they were watching it on VHS. Plenty of people watched it in the cinema, but I'm talking about it specifically its Oscar campaign.
I just remember that we didn't completely finish that thought with why Brooks is in prison.
Well, he's been there for a long time, so you've got to imagine it's something pretty bad.
Yes, so according to the short story, he murdered his wife and his daughter.
Yeah.
So if someone is sanded off in this version of the story, it's him. But also there was supposed to be the scene where he explains how the first meeting with Andy and one of the guards was Guard Deakins, for whom he did the first taxes, right? Probably named after another Deakins, I would imagine. But I also thought it was a good pun. Andy gets a job in the library and then he has to work some books.
Well, good for him.
But still, when Brooks is telling the story to the other prisoners, he was supposed, according to the script, he was supposed to be way more sweary and stuff like that. But then the actor James Whitmore argued that, well, if he's from that bygone age, probably he doesn't swear as much. But could probably also just be James Whitmore going, yeah, I don't think I want to swear as a character, so maybe let's not. I'll find a reason not to have to. And then Darabont goes, I really like you as an actor, James Whitmore, and want you in my movie. So yeah, if you don't want to swear, then let's not swear. And then it turns out to be the scene that it is. But it also makes him way more into this friendly grandpa character. A very inoffensive, sweet old guy who seems to have found himself in a prison stint since 1905.
But it's the extent to which he's been institutionalized. So by the time you see him, he's at the end of his journey. Mm-hmm. You didn't see him at the beginning. Maybe he was, more...
we do see him for 10 years of a stretch. So there could have been a development in that, at least, before he was that institutionalized.
I think there is, but it happens very quickly. Like all development, it's shown in one scene rather than a gradual thing. He's shown to be a kindly old man with a bird who then threatens to murder his friend so he can stay in prison. you don't see that bubbling over time. And again, part of that is because this movie is very busy with so much.
Well, that's to get everything done in a bit more than 2 hours, so yeah. Do you think if the movie was made now that they would take more time for all that other stuff and it would balloon up to a 3-hour movie?
No. I don't think that would make it a better movie. It might make it a good TV show.
I'm not saying it's a better movie. I would say that it would be done, that would be the way it would be handled now, maybe.
Well, the film is already 140 minutes. Mm-hmm. It's already a long film.
Yeah.
So I don't know what adding another 40 minutes would do. More likely, it would just add more storylines.
Yeah.
Because it's not like this is all there in the source material. It's a longer film than it is a book.
Yeah. The Brooks going out of prison is just one paragraph in the original story. Here it's a 5-minute scene.
So things are already stretched. I think the problem is just a lack of focus. And I think that the temperament of the film is to try and show as many different events as possible, to the extent that it just sort of becomes like, oh, here's another thing. And it's pretty unaffected because it's not really connected to the main narrative. Maybe thematically it is, but I don't know. I think the Brooks, to be fair, I think the Brooks stuff works, to be fair to the film. I do think that the section where Brooks is out of prison and he's writing his letter, that's one of the most well done parts of the film. But I don't care.
Doesn't save it. I think that the movie is, I would agree on the point that the movie is more interested in adding more plot points everywhere than to deepen story.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there is a version of this film that is shorter and has more depth. I don't think the length is the problem. I don't think the lack of an extra 40 minutes is the problem.
I'm not saying that that is the problem. I'm just saying that that might be the way they would handle it now.
I know I'm not arguing with you. I'm just thinking out loud.
Okay.
I think we're on the same page about that.
But you did think of some improvements with which you want to be blowing my mind, right? So
yeah.
Please, explode it off the page, please.
Improvement Dazio.
Red should know about the escape. Red should know about the escape, and he should find out by investigating it himself. Andy shouldn't tell him, he should find out. And I also think that there should be an opportunity for Red to join the escape, but that he doesn't, because he's too scared of going on the outside.
Not of being caught, just of being on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's being caught, but it's just, well, then what? Because he doesn't know the whole Randall Stevens thing. He doesn't know that Andy has all this money hidden away, that he can just escape. He just thinks they're going to be on the run. And his plan to escape is very personal, but the fact that there should be an opportunity for Red to join in on that and he chooses not to, I think could be very dramatically fulfilling. And it shows the sort of philosophical disconnect between Andy and Red. And knowing about it also allows you to get into Andy's head as he's doing the escape, rather than after we know it was successful.
And why would that make it a better movie?
I don't know, because something dramatic would happen. I also think that you would get a clear line in the sand between Red and Andy that makes Red a more complicated and flawed character. Because he's someone that has the possibility, seemingly, of taking this risk and escaping. Better to die free than live a prisoner. Which seems to be Andy's perspective.
Yeah.
Especially by the end of the film. And you could also tie that into him thinking he deserves to be there until they say he can go, because he's so regretful about everything he did to get him into Shawshank.
Thinking now you're explaining all these things, I have a better view of, now you're introducing other things that you can explore with those story beats. Because a lot of those other things about just not wanting to go out and stuff like that, the bare bones of it is stuff that's already said with this version of the movie.
But here's a dramatic culmination of that, rather than Red not really doing anything until other people let him. I want him to sort of have a line in the sand and make something that audiences can agree with or disagree with, but couldn't fundamentally understand how he's willing to make that sacrifice because of A, his own guilt, and B, his own fear.
Yeah.
So if Red is going to stay our protagonist and point of view, not protagonist, because I do think Andy is the protagonist and he's most active, but because Red is our point of view character, it's frustrating that he's so passive, and giving him something, a real decision to make, that would be very interesting to me, at least.
I'm trying
You look very unconvinced.
No. I'm trying to think of a way of framing a certain question that I want to ask, of which I don't know if there's any good way of asking it.
Well, the main question is, how could Red be included in that
Do you
scape?
think that the irony of Shawshank Redemption is that the whole movie also functions as a sort of a prison for the character of Red, who is, let's say, caught in a landscape in which he is unable to perform any action? Except for at the very end when he gets to go to Zihuatanejo.
Yeah, but that's once he's out of prison.
And even that is something that has been given to him. It's not his own decision that much. He's being made to promise by Andy, basically.
Andy's relationship to Red is very patrician. It's very...
Sam and Frodo?
Yeah, he's a sidekick, and that's fine. And like, sidekicks are interesting, but when you have a performance like Morgan Freeman, you kind of wish he had more to do than just narrate in a very soothing way.
Do you think this movie, even though it was a big break for Morgan Freeman, is also kind of a cause for him not to be able to do even more interesting work? Because most other movies after this are sort of a repetition of a character who is reflecting on stuff. He's very authoritative and telling us as the viewer what to feel and think about certain things. It did make a mold for a lot of characters he played after this, even though they're able to perform more actions in those other stories.
That's a really tough one, actually, because it does crystallize for us the idea of the Morgan Freeman character, and the fact that he does sort of get stuck in the sort of magical Negro trope. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that isn't to say that he hasn't done interesting work. I mean, you can ask the same about someone like Samuel L. Jackson, who gets his big break in Pulp Fiction. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the characters he's played are variations on that energy. I don't think it's uncommon for a lot of actors, particularly older actors, to have a type and have a style that, maybe doesn't lead them to play the most diverse range of characters.
No.
But that's not that bad. I mean, people don't ask if Harrison Ford ever regretted only being able to sort of play frustrated badasses. Like, it's... And look, the guy has an Oscar. Mm-hmm. And he was in a Batman movie.
Yeah.
Like, he's had a good career. And he's still working. So I'm not crying for Morgan Freeman getting pigeonholed by this movie.
I just want to ask you, what are your 3 recommendations?
For films related to Shawshank?
Anything goes. If you want to have them related to Shawshank, go nuts.
Tip 1!
If you want to watch a very different sort of Tim Robbins performance, you should probably check out Robert Altman's The Player from 1992, where he plays a sort of sleazy Hollywood producer.
I think you should watch that anyway, whether you want to see that kind of performance from Tim Robbins or not.
That's a great film. Mm-hmm. If you want to watch a great Prison Break movie, I mean, there are a lot. I mean, arguably, The Grand Budapest Hotel is a great Prison Break movie, as is Paddington 2.
Are they both a recommendation?
No, I think I'm going to go classy and say...
Tip 2!
1934's The Count of Monte Cristo, which is referenced in the film.
Yeah.
The book, at least.
You're not going the Jim Caviezel one.
I am not.
What makes the 30s version better?
Jim Caviezel isn't in it. And his unique brand of Christian fascism.
Tip 3!
And I guess my final one, if you just want a damn good time, and should be out by now, our episode on the podcast with guest host Fionn Creeber on Buckaroo Banzai.
Oh, yeah.
The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai in the Eighth Dimension from 1984, directed by W.D. Richter.
Yeah, that is a gem.
Unfortunately, there is no prison break, but it does have philosophy far more meaningful than any deployed in Shawshank Redemption.
Like the stuff with the watermelon.
Well, you know the story behind the watermelon?
Yeah, I'll explain later. No, I don't know. What?
Well, they were trying to test if the studio was watching the dailies. So they put in that bit about the watermelon, and when they didn't get any questions about it, they knew that they could just do whatever they want and no one would care. They just given up on the film.
Oh, that's a good story.
Yeah, great movie. Well, thank you so much. It was lovely meeting you.
And so we fought and we battled, yes, we beat each other up. Both of us tried hard, we both failed. Yes, I had you by the thumbs, but neither of us won. Only the love for cinema prevailed.
And that, as they say, is that. Thank you so much for listening, and also a lot of thanks to Charlie Harris for being such a good sport. And remember, you can hear Charlie talk a lot more about Buckaroo Banzai on the Because You Watched podcast. Links in description. Now, are there any movie recommendations that I can make? Of course. 2 weeks ago now, to the day, I watched Past Lives, which supposedly is a very big contender for next year's Oscars, at least for the Best Picture race. I think it deserves its praise. At the very least, it is a very good feature debut by stage writer Celine Song, especially because it is way more filmic than most film debuts by theatre writers. And I mean, I really like big gestures and flashy dialogue, but Past Lives seems to say a lot more when the characters are quiet and a lot more through its imagery. It is a small story, and it has a level of longing that is only matched by In the Mood for Love and Lost in Translation. Another film I saw is The Lady Eve, which was the opening film for a Preston Sturges retrospective at the Eye Film Museum in Amsterdam. Why aren't more comedy movies like this? The dialogues are sharp, there are a lot of pratfalls, but also the story itself is inherently funny. It's a thing that even if you see it these days, it's not at this level. And I also saw the opening film for the Nederlands Film Festival in Utrecht, which then went on to win the Golden Calf for Best Film, and is also the Dutch submission for the Oscars this year. I'm talking about Sweet Dreams by Ena Sendijarevich. Or is it Sendijarevich? I don't know. Anyway, it's a film which picks apart Dutch colonialism in the East Indies, or in other words, Indonesia. And it stars René Soutendijk. This film is way more stylistic than most Dutch movies, and also quite funny. Painful, but funny. But it plays in Dutch cinemas now, so go enjoy it. And I think that's about it. So this was a cinema production, hosted and edited by me, which is Ruud de 20e Eeuwse Vos, and with the lovely jingles provided to me by the genius that is Roy Grutters. This podcast is also made possible by my patrons, by Casey the Great, Onno Lubbers, The Holy Saint Niels Timmer, and Martijn van Kolwijk. If you also want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/duimpjeworstelen. But you can also find us on all kinds of social media platforms like X, Facebook, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you have a nice, juicy, steamy hate mail just for me, please send it to duimpjeworstelen@gmail.com. I thank you in advance. All right, that's it. See you in about 2 weeks, and a big bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, could we have an enormous round of applause, please, for our host, who has once again succeeded in bringing to us a plethora of top-notch, cinematographically themed entertainment. We have had an absolute ball, have we not? Next time on Thumb Wrestling.
Ik zeg, dit is een fantastische premisse. Three Billboards heeft een heel mooie premisse. The Banshee heeft een heel mooie premisse. Iets wat je helemaal lokt naar de bioscoop om de film te kijken. Want je wil weten hoe dit verder gaat. En dan zie je uiteindelijk de Banshees. En bij de Banshees dacht ik ook... op een gegeven moment loopt het verhaal een beetje spaak... bij meerdere films van McDonough misschien. Eindigt het altijd in een anticlimax... terwijl het heel erg wordt gehint dat het naar een climax gaat opbouwen.
Ja.
En bij de Banshees dacht ik ook op het eind... wat moet ik nou met deze film? Ik weet het niet goed.
This podcast employs a strict only like and subscribe if you really want to policy. Okay, bye.